When I'm setting a project up for controls, I want to think a little bit about function. Any control that I make for my joints should be readily available to my animator and visible outside of the model. I'm not going to need to select my geometry anymore, but I do want to be able to see it. My geometry is on this geo layer, and I am going to set that to T for template, which means that I can no longer select my geometry, but I can see its outline, and that's going to make my life just a little bit easier. I also want each of my controls to have a slightly different shape, as denotes the function of the control. So, for example, this root joint here is really important, and it is right in the center of this ball. I might use my circle curve to simulate the ball and the center. All the rest of my curves are really sharp and angular, and that will help this to stand out. If you don't have a circle curve in your window, that's okay. You can go to Create, NURBS Primitives, Circle, and remember, if you Control-Shift-Click on this, that will add it to your rigging shelf. Once you've got your curve created, the next thing that you want to do is you want to take this curve and you want to move it into position around your root joint. That way, it will make a nice visual connection between the curve and the joint. My curve looks like it's more or less the same size as the ball, so I am going to scale mine up just a little bit. And now it is all set to become a control. I'm going to name it. I will call this one my root CTL for control, and that way I know what it is. Next, while I'm up here in the channel box, I can see that I've got all of this annoying data in here. I've translated up 1 unit, and I've scaled this up a little bit. I don't want to have any of this data on my curve when I do activate the control. That would be bad. It would interfere with the function of the joint. It can mess things up pretty badly. There are a few ways that we can avoid having this data, and I'm going to walk through them all now before we move on, and in each case I'll talk about the pluses and the minuses. The first way is that I can go to my Modify menu and I can run the Freeze Transformations command. Freeze Transformations will reset this curve so that it believes that it is currently at the origin. This is nice, it's easy, it's quick, and if you look at my shelf, you'll see that I have this FT button here. That's my Freeze Transformation button, because I like to freeze transformations on things. I like doing things the quick way. Sometimes it's really easy. Just so you can see what that looks like, this curve is now frozen, and it is all reset. That creates a node here that says Transform Geometry, and then I've got this Make NURB Circle 1 node from when I made it. So anytime I do this, I also want to delete my history, and that is Edit, Delete by Type, History. That's another one that I'm going to be running pretty frequently, and you'll see that right next to Freeze Transformations, I've got a Delete by Type History button right here on my shelf. So you can see what that looks like. Delete by Type, History. And now you see that those inputs are gone. So method number 1 is freezing transformations and then deleting history. I am going to Control-Z undo. That first one undoes my delete history, and the second one will undo my freeze transformations. For method number 2, I'm going to move over to the attribute editor, And this attribute editor thing was only added in the 2020 release for Maya, so I'm not as familiar with it as I am with some other things, but we're going to try it anyway. In the attribute editor, in addition to my attribute transforms, I've got a transform offset parent matrix, which is pretty awesome. And I need to spend a little more time with it to really fully utilize it, but watch this. I can take this number 1 here. I am going to Control C to copy it. Maybe I'll even Control X to copy and delete. I'll replace it with a 0 and press Enter. The curve goes back down to the origin. When I Control V to paste that into the transform offset matrix, the curve pops right back up, and that 1 doesn't come back into the world space coordinates. I'll do the same thing with scale. I will Control X to remove, and then Control V to paste. Because I am using a uniform scale, I will only have to do that copy 1 time, and then I can just go through and paste, paste, paste. And you'll see that at first the curve will be a little bit lumpy, but I can just reset all of these values to 1. Now I will have a completely round curve. It will be scaled up very slightly. When I go back to my channel box, all of my channels will be zeroed out. So this is a nice clean curve, and that's because I transferred all of the data from up here in the regular attributes down to this offset matrix. That's really tricky, and it's also really cool because it means that I've got this offset built right into the curve, and that's going to be a really powerful thing for us at some point. It might not be right now at this very second, but it's good for you to know that this thing exists. So I will go ahead and Control Z back a ways. Let's go back to, sure, all the way back. So this is my curve, and you'll note that it is not snapped up to the joint yet, and that's because I want to show you a third method for ensuring that there's no data on your curve when you move it into place to make it into a control. This method is going to look a little weird, and you're going to have to watch it very closely. What I'm going to do is I am going to take this curve, this NURBS circle 1, and I am going to group it to itself. So I have NURBS circle 1 selected, and I'm going to press Control G. If I look over here in my outliner, I can see that now I've got group 1, and underneath group 1 I've got NURBS circle 1. There's NURBS circle 1, there's group 1. Because the curve is at the origin, their pivot points are in the exact same place. So group 1 is the parent, NURBS circle 1 is the child. If I take group 1, I can use my move tool, and again I'm going to hold down V and snap that up to my root joint. That looks good. And I've still got the group node selected. I will move over to my scale tool and scale that up a little tiny bit. Now it looks like what I've done is I've moved the curve and scaled the curve. I haven't. If I look at the curve, NURBS circle 1 is still all zeros. Except for scale. Scale is 1. Scale is always 1. The group node contains the transform data. The curve just lives where it lives. So it has inherited the transform data from the group, and it itself is still untouched, pure, and at its origin. For this method, because I have 2 objects, it's very important for me to keep them separate. So I'm going to be sure that I'm designating this as root group, and this one as root control. Now this is a really useful method, and I love this one, first because it's very simple. all I had to do was make a group node, and then I can just move the group node freely. I don't have to worry about freezing transformations. There's nothing going on in the attribute editor. It's just a group node. This is also very common amongst riggers because there are all kinds of times when we want to move things but not actually move them. So I will be doing this method quite a bit. Anytime I don't use it, I will make a specific note and be sure to tell you why I'm not using it, but this will be my most common method. I will create a curve, group it to itself, and then position my group node in place. With that in mind, I'm going to pause here so you have a little bit of time to ruminate on moving curves, freezing transformations, thinking about placement matrices, and of course, think a little bit about grouping and how the child of the group node inherits the transforms of its parents. Next video, I will start actually using some curves.